Amara. Welcome to Adulting with Autism.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
Okay, so for all my listeners out there new to you, how do you introduce yourself?
I'm Amara. I'm the founder of Precision Consulting, and we are a CRO and UX UI consultancy firm based in behavioral psychology. And we work with different businesses to essentially help them generate more revenue out of their existing traffic. I've recently gone full time into this actually. I think earlier last year is when I decided to quit my full-time job and go all in into my own business. And yeah, now this is what I'm doing full time.
I'm so jealous. That's my goal. So you progress like pretty quickly in like high pressure international roles, which I could never do before you were like late diagnosed neurodivergent. Did
Yeah.
that diagnosis kind of help you figure out, oh, this is why I do these things?
So here's the thing. I feel like there were certain parts where I was kind of doing it, like doing the weird diagnosis to myself as like I was a teenager. And I feel like there's a lot of us do this where we pick up psychology as like, this an interest and we read a lot about it. And then half of those people go become like psychology majors. And I almost actually did become a psych major. And then I don't know what happened. I was discussing with my parents or something. I was like, I think I'm gonna become a psychologist. And they were like, I don't know, like, what's the market like at the time? And so somehow I ended up becoming a business major because of the career potential, but I almost did. I was like, I think, this is the way to go. And so it just ended up becoming like a hobby thing that I just read incessantly, which was surprise, surprise, just me basically trying to understand what goes on in here. But I think what it really did for me, to be honest, is just help me, I think, get better vocabulary to understand what is going on in my head. And I think be a little more gentler in terms of language, with myself. Because a lot of times I feel like I would get frustrated and it's easy to kind of lean into the atypical language of, or your typical language of where you're like, oh, why is this so weird, or why can't I just not seem to get it? Or why can it just not function the way it's other people are functioning? And you're not always the kindest to yourself. And you feel
Right.
like it's just because it's something is lacking or something is broken. Or I would constantly, tell my therapist, I'm like, I feel like everybody else was given like a manual at first and I was not. And there's like a secret manual and I don't have it. I don't understand where this booklet is. Just hand it to me, somebody, right? Like, where is it? Right. And so I think for me, when I did finally get that, I was like, okay, so at least there's a reason now. And I at least there's like a community and a reason and there's vocabulary and there's a method to all this madness essentially.
So, which strengths did your neurodivergent mind bring to commercial growth and operational leadership?
There is like so much. So I think a couple. One is I was really, really good at problem solving and I was very, very good at catching patterns really fast. So I would, and I would also, pick up skills really fast because I would want to kind of move around and I would want to, every time I would kind of pick up a skill and then I'd be like, okay, I'm kind of, bored of this. I want to pick up like something new. So generally people would want to come in and they would want to progress and, they would very safeguard their scope a lot. For me, it was the complete opposite because I knew I would eventually get bored. I would always come into like a team or anything and my thing was how quickly can I make myself obsolete, right? How quickly do I make this entire function, I do I fix the loopholes and make everybody work in a way where I become obsolete, right? And so it, for me, I think it ended up being in a way where I ended up going towards like service leadership, and it ended up being a way where I could, progress into a lot of different roles and progress higher coincidentally. But at the same time, I think it was also very interesting because I was working in so many different functions. Like I started off in data, but then I moved to commercial, and then I moved to, product, and then I moved into growth. So every time I would do one of these moves, and then I would end up in like a different function or a different industry or a different business, but I would have like all this other information with me. And so I would have this weird cocktail in this already interestingly bizarre brain, and then I would have like just the bizarrest things coming out of me, and they'd be like, what is going on? And I didn't really know how to tell them what is the package that they're getting. And I was it's like, you just have to experience it. This is just something you have to experience. What's your I will show up, we will work, and then you will figure it out.
So you've also been one of the only women in boardrooms with nothing but men. What did you learn about power, belonging, and, being visible versus, the stereotype?
Firstly, I learned I'm so good at masking because nobody can tell, I was like, wow. I mean, either that or men are dumber than I expected. Both. I go for both. But I think it's so many things, and some of them honestly they make me so sad because when I think for women especially, when you end up in these rooms, and what happens is it's already a struggle to kind of get there, right? Because you have to work like 200% to get there. For me, I remember if a male colleague of mine would, have to get the same position, they would simply get the position, and then they would get to do the work. For me, it was opposite, right? I would have to come in. I would, if I really wanted to, switch on to a new role and I wouldn't want to pitch myself for it, I would come in at 8 a.m. I would go home at like midnight. I would start taking both the roles, like work, and I would do the work first in addition to my existing work, and be like, look, I can do this now that I've proven it to you while doing my existing job. Will you please give it to me? And that's how I would, and they'd be like, okay, we'll consider it graciously, right? And so that's how I would have to work for it, right? And I was like, first of all, I'm still doing a better job than your other people. What is your problem? Right? But it's so hard to get into that room to begin with. And then even when you're in that room, there's this constant need, I feel, to, you know, re- justify why you're there, or there's this just subtle sort of questioning of, constantly proving of, do you really belong though? Do you really? And I think it was made worse because oftentimes I was also the youngest, so it wasn't just that they were all men, it was also that they were a lot older than me as well. And the first time I think this happened, most of these guys were in their mid 30s, late 30s, and I was like a 28-year-old. And so they were just like, no, but why are you here? And I was like, well, I worked for it. I mean, I made it here on merit. It's not like my dad's like some rich person who was just like, yeah, I'll buy the company and you can go in. Like I come from a very low income household, sir. My dad can't buy me the company. Right. So I think it's really so sad the sort of work you have to do, and then the balance you have to kind of strike, because you have to start building these relationships, because a lot of the work that you then have to do with the team around you relies on you building these personal relationships with the people around you, but you also need them to take you, seriously. So there needs to be a certain level of assertiveness there. So you will have to kind of build these friendships, but you also have to kind of get them to take you seriously, you know, at the right levels. And it's so tricky, I think, especially while you're trying to navigate already in a difficult place from where you're not really truly understanding the social cues, and you're kind of, with me, I think the biggest problem was I would always just say what I thought, and that's not the thing to do, right?
I mean, I do it all day.
Yeah, the number of times people have been like, "Shut up, you're gonna get fired." And I was like, "I haven't yet though." So, we'll see. And I was like, "Okay, but like you can't fire me for saying the right thing. Okay, why are you doing the stupid thing?" is my question though.
Fair.
Have you considered being less stupid, sir? It's just why am I the problem and why not you? And so it's such a difficult, I feel like, balance to kind of navigate all of it. But I think afterwards, once I had a diagnosis, what was helpful is getting into therapy and kind of getting some sort of support in being able to figure out, how to sort of navigate those situations, getting myself some sort of tools and being able to at least navigate those situations and identify what exactly is happening, why I I react a certain way, or why I, see a situation a certain way. And that did, help to an extent. So then I think it got a little better. I never shut up, but I think I just understood it better.
So, how do you build a business on your own terms? You went from one place to the other.
I think for me, to be honest, that was like the biggest sort of freedom moment for the first time, was being able to build this. It was both absolutely freeing and absolutely nerve-wracking, because in a way it was for the first time that I was truly, completely getting to end pick exactly the sort of work I wanted to do, exactly the way I wanted to do it. I did not have to, sugarcoat the level of values and principles I wanted to, inculcate, and how much importance I wanted to give a certain thing, or how particular I wanted to be about a certain thing. It did not matter, like I was the ultimate boss, right? So it was it was so amazing to be able to have that sort of freedom and be able to do that. But at the same time, knowing that you have to do all of that from like scratch and not really having the path charted out was so paralyzing, initially, that I just did not know what to do. I was like, what do I do with this stupid idea? Like, what? I just sat there at the couch, just staring at the ceiling for like 2 weeks. I was like, no, I can't. And then I remember I like started doing these calls with these, mentors, being like, okay, so this is like on my side hustle, and I think I'm gonna take it full time. What do I do? And this happens a lot, especially because, like, of the ADHD, where I'd go into like, anytime I get any vague task, I go into like extreme paralysis. I get very, very anxious. I cannot do it. And then I perform great under pressure. So then I looked at my bank statement, right? I was like, look at where your savings are at. That is what's gonna motivate you to get your ass off the ground and get started on getting this off the ground. So I start looking at that, and I start talking to these people, and I'm just like, I should just start putting down notes, even if I can get like baby tasks, it'll give me some direction. And I think that's where I can kind of start like figuring things out. If I can get to the editing stage where I can, start finessing stuff, then I can start bringing a lot more structure. But unless I have a spreadsheet, unless I have like steps to follow, it all goes haywire. So for me, the first thing was I just need to put like some 5 steps down, like do step one, step two, step three. But what are those steps? I have nobody to tell me, because I decided I wanted to be the ultimate boss. And so I had to go figure it out myself.
What would you tell other neurodivergents who want to start their own business and the reality of it? Because, when they're younger, they're like, I've got this great idea. I can just be my own boss and make $1 million.
You can do it. Absolutely. I want to say you can absolutely do it. The only thing that you do need to, be careful about in the way you need to structure it is you have to bring in a lot of structure and accountability. So for me, I am a very impatient person. I don't do well with like a lot of uncertainty, or for example, I didn't do well with a lot of like, vague instructions and stuff. And so doing this was a very different experience. It was putting myself in a completely different situation. And so oftentimes you kind of have to sit down and have a chat with yourself when you're kind of, freaking out, and you're spazzing, and you're like, it's okay. This is why we did this, right? And I get why you're basically splitting in that moment and just talking to yourself, and you're just like, I understand why you're kind of freaking out at this, but it's all right. So I think as long as you go into this knowing what, are going to be your trigger points, what is going to cause you anxiety, and preparing for those things in advance, right? As long as you go into this aware and cognizant and prepared, and not just all delusional and just like, oh, I'll figure it out on the fly, you're going to be fine. And what's also super important is to have a good system around you. I think that's so helpful, right? Like having, friends and family that are supportive, that you can, talk to, that you can rely on. Even if it's something simple like, you just need a break maybe, or you just need to like, chat things out. Because sometimes you can't figure things out maybe like this. Like a lot of people, it varies, right? Like I've always been, for example, a really good like auditory learner, and I wasn't very good at like, doing the whole like reading learn, even though I'm a huge reader, but I really enjoy like just reading in terms of like for entertainment. When I was at school, I didn't really do, really well with the whole, I got bored because I would get distracted. but I but conversations, if if I would remember them perfectly, so I would just stay on call with like my friends, and I would just do all my revisions like that. And my parents would be like, there's no way you're studying, this is absolute bullshit, you're just racking up the bills, you were just chatting up with your friends, you're gonna fail in your exams. And I'm like, no, but I swear I am. And they're like, there's nobody studies on the phone like that for 2 hours. Absolutely not. And so again, but back then, like I didn't know, and we didn't have the vocab for it, and like now I know. I'm like, okay, auditory learners is a thing, and like that's all. So again, but if you have the people around you, you can just talk it out, and not talking it out in itself oftentimes gives you, the whole 1, 2, 3, 4 that you're looking for. You don't have to, figure it out alone. So surrounding yourself with the people, being open, with the people around you, and using the tools around you, the mentors, people who've been there. I think that's the biggest thing is don't be shy. Don't feel like, oh, I'm gonna look stupid. It's okay. We're gonna look stupid anyways, and we do look stupid anyways. I think at least we're gonna come out successful in the end. That's the bigger goal.
Okay, so you use behavioral psychology to examine how people make purchases online. So, how does that add that traditional make the button bigger conversion that like regular advice doesn't give?
Oh my God, the number of times people have come to me with the buttons and how it matches the other colors. And I'm like, there are bigger problems, sir. People cannot read what's happening. I think that's the thing, right? When you've spent so much time trying to just understand and decipher the people around you and how they function and why they function a certain way, um and for yourself as well, I think you read into a lot of cues, and then of course afterward it became like a, professional interest as well. So I spend a lot of time, from that perspective as well, in what a lot of businesses and fail to understand is when we go on to these websites and these apps, it's you don't look at, necessarily the size of a button. You interact with it in a certain way. You have these mental models, from interacting with hundreds of other websites, right? And you show up on these platforms with certain questions in a certain mood. And when you're in a certain mood, you show up in a certain way, your eyes move in a certain pattern. So when they move in that pattern, they will see certain things and they won't see certain things, right? And people just kind of, miss all of that information, and they go like, okay, we have this checklist, and the checklist says, you need to have your cider, a headline, and a hook, and that's how, you create a good landing page. And yes, that's the structure, but it doesn't work that way for everything, right? It's you can't apply it to everything. It has to be specific to your customer, to your product, because otherwise it's just a copy pasted, template that's just applied everywhere. And that's why, people who are right now just mass producing stuff off of like AI builders, seeing these problems all the more, is that AI is really good at getting things done for people in terms of providing tools to people who, for example, do not have access to developers. It's great at that. It's great at, democratizing access for people. But what it's not great at doing is removing the part where you still have to put in the effort and you still have to learn things and you still have to do the thinking and, applying yourself. So if you don't know what good is and what good looks like, you can't use it well, right? So you can't actually provide your users with the experience where they come onto the platform and they actually understand, what they're seeing. I was going through like a platform the other day, and they were they were actually doing, really nice thing where they were creating these fabrics which were completely made out of organic coffee material and super sustainable and everything, but they hadn't seen any growth in quite some time. And when I went to like their page, the first thing it said was drink coffee, wear coffee. And I was like, I'm so confused, because what does that even mean? Like, if I have just shown up to your website and I have zero context, I don't know if I'm here to buy coffee or if I'm here to just, get bathed in it, or are you selling me a scrub? And really, they sell no coffee. It's only t-shirts, but I get none of that from just that one line, right? Like, as a user, I'm just
Okay.
confused, right? Like, I'm just confused. And I'm like, sir, you you have the right intentions, and people actually do care about, you know, organic products and sustainability now. So you have the right people and the right intentions. You just have the most confusing message as to what are you trying to say, right? So people are just doing I think they get so lost in the whole branding and making it look sophisticated that we overcomplicate everything in instead of just simplifying things as much as possible.
So, from a neurodivergent lens here, how can someone fix like a leaky funnel if they're in business?
I think they're actually, in such a good position, because I feel like they can do it in a way where they do it for both the typicals and the divergents. Because what I see is they the speed at which, they are able to recognize once, they're in once they have a good handle on, what are the general friction points or how to go about reading the data, they are able to pick these things a lot faster, right? So, and for them, the good thing is that they not only are able to pick the most general patterns, but they're also able to pick out the more, nuanced patterns where they're kind of noticing, okay, what might be more, frustrating or difficult in terms of a slightly more difficult to navigate, or in terms of visibility, if something is, just a little bit, irritating. And so you know that it's not going to be the best experience for a neurodivergent person. And so that way you just have it, catered for both people, and you know that you're optimized for conversion. But I think for neurodivergence in particular, the best way to, review your business and how to kind of like, improve the funnel is really start at, the top of your data. And one of the key things that a lot of businesses miss is we look at conversion rate as a whole. Just we look at, okay, these are the total number of people that came onto the platform, and these are the total number of people that bought something. And that's where the biggest miss is, because that looks at things too high a level. And when we want to, really look at friction points, we need to look at the user journey, and that happens at smaller paces, right? So you need to really understand what are the entry points, where exactly is the traffic coming from, what pages. And this is where this other, metric, which is called the micro conversion rates, which is page to page conversion rates, right? That really comes in handy. And so you want to break it down to that level, and you want to see where does it break from that perspective. So you don't want to just look at the entire funnel right at the end. You want to, look at it from the detailed perspective, and you want to see where do you see the leakages there. The biggest leakage there essentially becomes your, biggest priority. And once you have that, you can kind of come up with hypotheses on why you think this might be happening. Then you can go into like, your user session recordings and figure out and see users and what they're doing, how they're interacting, what seems to be, a particular point in the journey that seems to be frustrating them, or if they're rage clicking a particular thing, a component's confusing them, whatever it is.
Now, what should leaders understand about like the difference between accountability and fear-driven pressure?
Oh my God, so much. Look, when it comes to fear driven pressure and accountability, I think the biggest difference is how comfortable is your team being able to come to you with the issues that they're facing, right? If if they're facing a problem and they need your feedback, or if they've, run into a mess up, are they able to come and, tell you, hey, we messed this up and we need your help fixing this? Because it that one question is a simple answer of, is this just simply an accountability problem, or do they absolutely fear you? And I think that makes the biggest difference in what makes for a high performing, healthy team. When you are just optimizing for fear, you might be able to drive the results initially, but in the long term, you lose all your key talent, right? Because there's very fast burnout. If people have, more than 3 brain cells, they're going to realize that their talents are definitely better applied elsewhere. And it's a very, toxic sort of environment to work in. And I think it just gets worse if anybody's even the slightest bit neurodivergent. I think it just adds, because if you're already masking and then there's this additional like fear, there's just, you are doing so much. I think the emotional toll and the psychological toll of all of that, in addition to the work itself, it just gets very, very tiring, right? And at the same time, if what is being asked of you is simply accountability and ownership, then it's a completely different ball game, right? Because then you can actually apply yourself, and if something's not working, you know that you can go and you can ask for the support, or you can tell people, your manager that, hey, I'm running into an issue with XYZ, or hey, I think I'm running behind on the target here and I want to raise it right now and I need the support, right? Because I want to make sure that I fix it, versus, "Oh, I need to like go hide in a cave because this is going to be the end of me and I'm going to be the next head on the chopping board." Right. So that, I think it makes such a big difference in how orgs run and succeed when those two sort of leadership styles come into play.
So, what's a practical way if they have their own business out there that they can test whether a problem is their offer, the audience, their communication, or the experience they have designed?
That's good. I think there are certain tells in terms of a lot of the data itself, right? That can kind of help give insight as to what the issue might be, right? So if, for example, if a brand is completely new and your marketing and people are not really like, for example, clicking through your ads, then depending on what sort of content you're running, it can, yes, it can be because it's not a super recognized brand depending on what category you're operating, but it can also just be and more often than not it's about the messaging, right? So that in itself firstly tells you that there's a messaging problem. What further can, help you understand if it's a messaging problem or not often is when, if you see the scroll depth on your homepage, because usually the first fold oftentimes is going to be more brand focused, even for, websites that are 1 to 2 product focused. They have, just 2 to 3 hero products, but they have this particular brand name, and so they again they sort of focus on a brand story or a brand name in that's the sort of messaging up top. And because a user may not necessarily understand or resonate, you might not see too many of them scrolling down or actually engaging with it. And so if you see a combination of those two metrics, then that can kind of potentially tell you that, okay, there is an issue in my messaging. If you see people, coming onto the platform, but then very quickly bouncing off or doing, a lot of back and forth and then, bouncing off, then you know that, okay, there seems to be a user journey issue, right? Because they're not either getting the right information in the right places. So either the product page is not answering the questions that they have or in the right places, so you might not have the shipping information where it needs to be, or the add to cart button, is working a certain way, or the variant works a certain way, whatever it may be. But the experience needs a second, look. Or similarly, if you see somebody actually looking at it for quite a bit, but then, after they spend some time, they actually leave and you do the market research and, it's, you do know that you're priced on the higher end, then you know that, okay, pricing is generally going to be the issue that you're competing on, in which case you need to kind of amp up more so on the benefits. You need to, push more on, okay, well, why does this additional price tag or this higher price tag actually make sense for this particular product? So I think there is, generally data available already. And if you feel like, you still need a more user specific answer, then of course, there's exit surveys available that you can kind of, put, say, hey, we just before you leave, can we, those little pop-ups, and they just say, just before you leave, can we ask why did you choose not to, make your purchase today? So the website was buggy, or the price was too high, or I didn't like the brand, or whatever it might be. And that can give you a straight from the horse's mouth.
Now, if someone out there listening feels intimidated by a career move or leaping to their own business with an idea, what do you want them to remember?
Please don't. I think more people need to be doing this. And especially now, I think, I mean, I have a lot of beef with a lot of the slop and stuff that AI's done, but I think what it's also done is democratize a lot of access for a lot of people, right? In giving a lot of everyday people tools that we did not have access to before. If a regular person wanted to build an app, they needed to, get capital and be able to hire developers and the whole thing. It wasn't something that was just accessible for anybody. Now it is. right? So I think do it because the only thing that you're, you know, there's generally what worries us is, oh, I'm going to embarrass myself, right? Or, oh, I'm going to fail. Or, hey, the job is a more secure, way of doing this. Business is not so much. And if you really think about it, there's answers to each of these. Jobs, especially in today's markets, are absolutely unsecure with the layoffs, with the way the job market is today. It's insane, right? You can actually potentially do a lot better in your own business. And look, in terms of failure, you can fail in anything anywhere, but you should at least give it a shot. And you don't necessarily need to quit your daytime job. You can start off with, side hustle. What you do require is a little bit of discipline, right? You can't just be like, okay, I'll keep doing this. So if you want to give it a shot, give it a proper shot. Spend 2-3 hours after work. Spend a couple of hours on the weekend. Give it proper time, and start building this so that you when you do decide to make the full-time move, you have a certain level built. But I think it's so important for more people to be doing this, because one of the things that we do is we take ourselves out of the equation before anybody else even has the chance to. And I feel like that it's so unnecessary. Like we ourselves have just decided that it's certain things, like being successful in being rich or wealthy or having certain businesses is for a select few or for a small percentage of people or for a certain type of people. And so we're like, we're just not those people. I was one of them. Like, when I remember my dad used to be like, initially used to be like, you should do your own business and stuff. And I was like, Dad, that's not me. I'm just gonna do my job. I don't know what to do with a business. I'm gonna just like put my head down. I'll progress in my career. Maybe I'll make it, like I'll get my way to the C-suite and that's it. Right? I would not know what to do with a business. I have no ideas whatsoever. And now I can't even think about it. I'm like, oh my God, no, no, sir, I don't want it. Right? So I think it just, what it is just giving yourself the permission to actually believe that you can do it, and giving yourself the permission to say that you too are the sort of person who can start this thing and who can do this thing. And it's okay if you fail. It's completely fine, because so many others have as well. And you might fail, the first time or the second time, but that's part of the journey. We fail at work as well, right? We don't hit successes on all our projects. But again, that's just part of the learning journey. But everything we build here would be completely yours. It would be, you get to add such immense value to the world. You get to bring such great things into the world.
Okay, final question. Where can listeners find precision consulting and explore like the insight hubs, request the free mini audit?
Go to goprecision.co and everything is over there. We've got a giant insights hub, all free. Check out all the resources, especially for people who are trying to figure out the funnels for themselves. Those are great tips and tools there, so you guys can use those. And you can definitely request a free mini audit there as well.
Mara, thank you so much for coming on to my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely chatting with you.